answer questions.
Okay, so we are live now and we can start.
Hello and welcome, dear colleagues. I'm very glad to start this presentation, the presentation of the Belarus Watch, which is a joint initiative by Ukrainian, Czech, and Belarusian partners. We are trying to follow the events in Belarus. We're trying to follow the developments because it is, from our Ukrainian experience, we've quite often face the situation when hot events are not in the place, the attention of the world just drops down. And it is very important from our part, and I think it's very important for the community of experts, analysts, journalists to keep on following what is going on in Belarus. And the focus of our research is not only the developments in Belarus, internal developments, but specifically the Russian influences, the Kremlin influences, the attempts of the Kremlin, which are noticeable, which are of course noticeable for decades, but which have been, very acute in the last months, in the past year, to take even more power in Belarus and to grab this country under its influence. So this project is run jointly by from Kyiv by Internews Ukraine and from Prague by European Values Center for Security Studies. And today we will have a short presentation of the initial findings that our colleagues, Belarusian experts, are doing. This project, this analytical project, is primarily made by Belarusian colleagues, and I'm very glad to introduce our experts here. It's Katerina Shmatina, fellow, Rethink CEE fellow at German Marshall Fund of the United States, and research fellow at Belarusian Institute for Strategic Studies. It is Vasil Navumov, visiting researcher at the Center for Advanced Internet Studies, researcher at the NGO Ukrainian Expert Foundation, and Tatiana Chulitska, researcher at Vytautas Magnus University. So I will, as I said, I'm very glad to pass the floor a little bit later to these colleagues. Just a few remarks that we'll ask each of the experts, and each of the experts that I presented just covered a little but important part of the study that they are making, focusing on political developments, focusing on security and military developments, focusing on civil society, public administration, church, internet, online, etc. So we try really to cover as many topics as possible to study the Kremlin influences. We will ask each colleague to present these findings. I will ask each of them to keep within 10 minutes, maybe 10, 12 minutes. And I will ask our audience to think about questions and to put your questions in written, so that we can have a key question and answer session a little bit later after the presentations. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm Analytics Director at Internews Ukraine and Chief Editor at ukraineworld.org, and now we'll moderate this event. We're still waiting for our colleagues from European Values Thinking. I hope they will join us a little bit later. But let me start with our speakers, and I will first invite Katerina Shmatina, and Katerina, I will ask you to present the findings in your field, including primarily the political developments. Katerina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and once again, greetings, and I'm happy to join this conversation today with you and to present the result of our work that we've been busy with for the past month. And I will also mention that the mapping, the text itself would be published soon, I guess in a day or two, and then it would be, and this is intended more of a baseline study of Russian influence. And then in addition, we also publish bi-weekly briefing updates. And then I guess in a bigger picture, or to have a better understanding of Russian interest and influence, it is good to have a look at both documents and to also see how much different, like to notice those differences compared to the baseline study. And I'm saying this because when I started writing the text on politics and international consequences of Belarus-Russia relations back in March or maybe February, if we were asked at that time, what is Russian position on the Belarusian crisis, we would conclude that Russia is rather a bystander, someone who is calculating their options on how to best capitalize on the Belarusian crisis, but not necessarily taking explicit stand on how to side with Lukashenko other than just a pure in the rhetorical way, and just to provide this brotherhood rhetoric and recognizing Lukashenko legitimacy. But as the time was passing by, we could observe those meetings with Lukashenko and Putin in Moscow, and discussing the pace of the integration talks, and also sort of updating the way Lukashenko was updating Putin on the pace of constitutional reform, at the same time cutting and distancing himself from relations with the West. And again, at that time, Russia's position was rather ambiguous, in the sense that there were calls from European leaders to facilitate possible mediation as a solution to the Belarusian crisis. And although Putin would respond that this is interference into Belarus domestic affairs, again, the Russian reaction was rather ambiguous, in the sense that maybe Putin would be willing to reconsider, maybe there is some room for negotiations with, let's say, Western leaders, and to join some hybrid format of, let's say, like OEC mediation. But in the developments of the past weeks, when there was this alleged coup attempt against Lukashenko, and the joint operation of security services of Belarus and Russia, this signaled us that Kremlin clearly sides with Lukashenko, in a sense that they would use this alleged coup attempt as a way to further distance Lukashenko from the West, and then make this possible talks with the West about mediation impossible. This also sends a strong signal to Belarusian opposition leaders, those who attempted to create some sort of dialogue and to reach out to decision makers in Kremlin in different levels, that their possible visits to Moscow are no longer possible at the fear of their own security. And at the same time, we see this continued talks about Russia-Belarusian integration, and various speculations about the possible content of this negotiations, whether they would eventually limit Belarus sovereignty or not. And then in our text, which unfortunately you cannot check it out at the moment, we try to hold a very moderate position on those sort of speculations and theories that would explicitly suggest that Belarus has taken away the sovereignty in exchange of, let's say, Putin's political support. But we still try to carefully examine what we know today, and what is safe to conclude given this whole information we have today. And also, maybe a separate topic I would like to briefly touch on is this talk about constitutional reform that Lukashenko has been using for past month. and also talking to Putin about this reform, and also about the so-called leakages and media investigations in the past month that reported that Kremlin is using the constitutional reform as a way to replace Lukashenko, and also possibly increase the role of political parties in the Belarusian system, so to say, to inspire the transition to the parliamentary form of governance, and then maybe to push forward some Russian political parties. And that was the assumption and the idea sort of floating in the media field in the past month. But I would say that in the past weeks, there were some interesting developments which caught our attention, such as the claims of the head of Constitutional Commission, who mentioned that there is no need for Belarusian for a substantial change of the form of governance, and that Belarusians sort of would be happy to have the presidential form of governance in the future. And what this means for this content of the constitutional reform, and also for Russia's interest, is that in the past months there were some documents from the International Affairs Commission in Kremlin that suggested that Russia is trying to consolidate those political groups friendly to Moscow and Belarus, and possibly create pro-Russian Belarusian parties. And when now the higher officials in Belarus claim that there is no need for a stronger role of the parliament in Belarus, and also recently the Belarusian party, the pro-Russian party Soyuz, was denied registration after the founding Congress. This means that Russia is changing its strategies towards Belarus, realizing that that previous tool was not necessarily the most effective one. But we can also conclude that Lukashenko, although he is forced to cooperate with, let's say, within the Union State integration framework, and he is pushed to do so by Moscow for past several years. He also and he has very little room for maneuvering into, let's say, explicitly disagreeing for further integration with Russia. But at the same time, domestically, he still has some leverage over power vertical domestically, and he still seeks how to strengthen this power vertical and not to allow this other forms of influence, such as creation of other political forces that could challenge his own interests. So I guess I will stop here, and I will be happy to talk in more details maybe at the Q&A session.
Thank you, Katerina. Thank you for your introductory remarks, and I think you raised several questions which I already would ask you to develop a little bit more, but maybe during the Q&A session. Let me just transfer the floor to Vasil Naumov, who will be talking about security and military aspects, which are very important, and also about the other issues of his expertise. Vasil, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, I would like to say that also I'm really glad to be here and to present the findings and the initial results of our baseline study, which, as Katerina has already said, should be certainly considered in connection to our current updates, which are represented in the weekly newsletter. But speaking about main spheres that I contributed to with this is first of all military sphere and security sphere, and Russia involvement within them. It should be said that those two dimensions appear to be main pillars of Lukashenko's regime, and Russia's influence is particularly significant here because both countries have been actively cooperating for more than 2 decades, conducting military exercises, providing trainings for the personnel, etc. And all this serves Russia's aim to deepen integration processes and increase the Belarusian independence. And it should be said that at the rhetorical level, Belarus has always been a committed Russian ally, and Russia always been clearly interested in securing the role of Belarus as a closest partner in military sphere. Due to its geographical location, Belarus holds an important strategic position, serving as a buffer between Russia and NATO countries. And by deploying its military on Belarusian territory, Russia could quickly block troops and cut out Baltic countries via Suwalki corridor, and also defend Kaliningrad region. That is why Russia is really interested in putting forward interest here. And one of the aspects of this cooperation in the military sphere is a regional group of forces. In 1998, Belarus approved concept of common defense policy, within which the agreement on the joint military cooperation has been signed, and a regional group of forces should react for military aggression under the command of the Union state. It should be said that it's quite difficult to utilize because there is a lack of clarity in decision-making processes. Second aspect of cooperation between countries is certainly military exercises. And since 2009, military training Zapad near the borders with NATO countries has been conducted. Every time when they are being exercised, there is speculation on attempts of Russia to increase its control over neighboring countries. And for example, the latest edition of this exercise in 2017 was meant to solve the so-called 2024 problem in the eyes of some experts. As we know, Putin solved this problem in much less subtle way. The new edition in September 2021 of the Zapad exercise is feared to become yet another threat for Ukraine and the Western countries. And another joint military exercise conducted by both countries, albeit on a smaller scale, is Union's Armor, or Щит Союза. Also, there is a third aspect that is important in the cooperation between two countries, is military objects. There are two military objects on the Belarusian territory currently. The first one is a communication center for atomic submarines NT, situated in Vleyka, Minsk region, and it should be maintained by 250 specialists. And the second one is stationed for radio-electronic intelligence Volga, situated in Khantsavichy-Brest region, which should be maintained by around 1,200 Russian specialists. In this year, there should be renegotiation of the agreement, which is set to expire. Also, another aspect of this cooperation in the military sphere in military-industrial complex, because Russia remains the key producer of Belarusian defense elements and main buyer of Belarusian VPK products, such as, for example, telecommunication and electronics, which is necessary for producing or repairing military equipment. So I think that those four aspects were the main and the key ones when speaking about the cooperation in the military sphere and Russian influence here. And further, we will proceed to the law enforcement agencies and cooperation in this sphere. And it should be said that there is a long-term cooperation between Russian Federal Security Service and Belarusian KGB. However, there is little trust between two sides because of several fallouts. One of them in the beginning of 2000s, when Lukashenko posted many of the security officers fearing their disloyalty because of their background. So they were had various education on the Russian territory within the USSR or in Russia. And another recent recent problem that emerged between two countries is the arrest of 32 or 34 Wagner mercenaries, which were allegedly destabilizing the situation in the country. And the third probably thing that should be said in this context is the topic of cooperation between two countries has become topics on everyone's lips after August 2020, when Putin announced that there is a contingent of military forces on the borders with Belarus designed to help the regime, which led to the many rumors of that Putin will support Father Lukashenko. And also there was a cooperation agreement between the Belarusian Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Russian National Guard. And, also, before the elections, Lukashenko started enhancing the power structures by replacing the high-ranked public officials with those who had civil education with those having military education, and which led to more influence of this people with this security and military background with his immediate environments, and this led certainly to probably could become one of the reasons of the really tough and brutal decisions made by him in repression of the protest. One of the recent stories showing the cooperation between the law enforcement agencies both countries is the alleged coup, allegedly organized by the opposition figures. And as you know, that two of the alleged organizers of the coup were expelled from Moscow. And FSB openly declared that it was the joint cooperation between two agencies. Yes, there are also a lot happening within this sphere lately, but it should be also reflected. It is reflected in our latest newsletter, and so we suggest you to address those in order to be able to understand the current picture. Speaking about the cooperation, Russia's influence in civil society, one should certainly mention that Russia tries to promote Russian world narrative, which links ideological and cultural domains and reflects Russia's aspirations to be seen both as a regional and a global power. In this narrative, Russia is branded as a distinct and self-sufficient civilization, trying to collect and integrate those Russian-speaking people who were displaced as a result of the USSR collapse. As a consequence, there are various civil society organizations and initiatives launched to promote Russia's agenda, to influence public opinion and win sympathy at the grassroots level. Main idea of this initiative, further integration in political and economic spheres, which is united under the concept of the United States, Union State. At this point, according to the latest poll, I think it was even before the 2020 elections, about 40% of Belarusians supported this Union State initiative. Probably, I mean, most definitely right now it's even lower. Also, Russia tries to use this part of the population, Russian-speaking population or compatriots, for the dissemination of Russophile ideas. And the main active Russian-sponsored agencies and foundations in the region are Сотрудничество, Ruski Mir Foundation, and Gorchakov Foundation for Public Diplomacy. In particular, Sotrudnichestvo, controlled by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, launched a network of pro-Russian organizations cooperating with compatriots, culture and art, research and education, language and public diplomacy. It has also 3 centers in Belarus, Minsk, Brest, and Homen. So the majority of cultural organizations, as has already been said, are built around Russian compatriots. These networks of people of Russian nationality cooperate with each other on the basis of common interest and shared cultural visions. Educational organizations represent another type of pro-Russian actor in Belarus. They are mostly focused on youth and students. Also, some Russian universities have their branches in Belarus, for example, Russian State Social University and the Russian University of Economics in Minsk. Finally, there are pro-military and sporting organizations in Belarus, which support pro-Russian agenda, messages and ideas. Orthodox organizations, Afghan veterans. They promote ideas and values of Orthodox Christianity and traditional values in parallel with the post-Soviet nostalgia and Stalin's positive evaluation. Also, on the formal level, there are several interconnections between Belarusian pro-governmental political parties and Russian partners. like the Communist Party of Belarus, the Liberal Democratic Party of Belarus, and the Republican Party of Labor and Justice, which promote ideas for deeper integration with Russia. I believe that this what is important to say about the involvement of Russia in civil society. And finally, media in internet. The last aspect or sphere that I've been covering within our study. It should be said that the Belarusian information field is significantly influenced by the Russian one, which can be explained by several factors. First of all, the inefficacy of state media. Second, strict work rules for independent media. Third, cultural influence and the absence of language barrier. And finally, Belarusian-Russian ties, quite deep ones in various fields. And indoctrination implemented by Russian authorities implemented on 3 levels. First, it's political statements and chronicles. Second, Russia-centered presentation of information. And third, Russia experts who try to produce Russian-centered content. And one of the most important is certainly the linguistic situation and cultural influence, because as you know, Belarus is characterized by bilingualism, and Russian language is dominating in many spheres of life. Hopefully the situation will gradually and slowly change as a result of the recent protests. And the similar situation observed in Belarusian media. The main supply of propaganda in Belarus is Russian media, both TV channels and internet sources. It's by which level, by which ways is it implemented? First of all, is via the network of propagandist media and websites, which promote Russian agenda and country's position on various levels, launched after 2014, and they use the so-called true and false strategy, meaning that they can provide some content which is natural, but at the same time, in parallel, the so-called private opinion of some bloggers or content creators is provided, and it is clearly pro-Russian ones and propagandist, providing propagandist opinion. Second is that state TV channels support pro-Russian propaganda. For example, pro-Russian position of various events, support of cliches, etc. And it should be said that 4 out of 9 TV channels included by the government in the compulsory public TV package are based on Russian TV production and broadcast. And there are more than 60% of Russian TV programs in prime time. Finally, after the start of mass protests in Belarus caused by falsifications in the presidential elections, Lukashenko asked for Kremlin support, and among other things, also the professional Russian propagandists went to the country, and at the same time, the correspondents of independent Western media were deprived by accreditation by the Belarusian Foreign Ministry, and as a result, they were deprived of the opportunity to work legally. And as it can be seen, there could be this leads to the conditions when pro-Russian narrative is being provided and supported by many actors in Belarus, and the information sphere becomes so-called colonized by the pro-Russian agenda. So I think that those are main things that I wanted to say, and I will be certainly to develop these topics in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. It was very important topics, and I think we'll cover them also in Q&A. This was Vasil Naumov, a fellow at the Orthodox Studio of Schodnik, the Center for Eastern Studies. And I would like to remind that beside our baseline study, which colleagues have mentioned, which will be published in the coming days, please follow these updates, the regular Belarus Watch newsletters, because as you see, the situation is developing and changing very quickly, and it is very important to really to follow the latest news. You can find these regular Belarus Watch newsletters on the European Values think tank website in Prague and in Ukraine on Ukraine World website. And let me also ask you to pose your questions already. You already listened to Katerina and Vasil, so I hope you have lots of questions. Me personally, I have lots of questions already, and we have already a couple of questions in the chat. So I pass the floor to Tatiana, who will be focusing on public administration issues, church issues, and several others. Tatiana, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I will try to take time Q&A session. So I'll just briefly tell some of the most important points about topics. Probably when we are talking about public administration in Belarus, the main source and reasons of Russian influence on public administration system are pro-Russian positions, ambitions, and even the whole politics of Alexander Lukashenko. Formal level of Russian influence on the public administration is provided through such institutions as founded in 1996 Union State of Russia in Belarus. We know that this union has a number of institutions inside itself. I will not stop on it, but we should remember about this formal level of cooperation. However, I should also mention that these formal structures have never developed into effective political institutions and still lack functionality alongside others promoted by Russia integration initiatives, which are targeting the countries of near abroad. I'm mentioning here Commonwealth of Independent States and so on, Eurasian Economic Union, so on and so forth. Nevertheless, these formal structures of the Union State, they create space for cooperation and communication between Belarusian and Russian officials. Similar to the Union State, formal cooperation of Belarusian public administration and officials, with Russian counterparts exist at the level of the Eurasian Economic Union and its formal institution. Also, from the formal point of view, both Belarusian ministers and members of the parliament, they have profound and well-established relations with Russian colleagues, and we can see it in their regular visits, meetings, summits, and numerous other official events. Belarusian officials of different levels, they are considered among the most susceptible to the Russian influence groups. In addition to the cooperation with their Russian counterparts within official institutions of the Union States and other formal institutions, they also have joint public organizations and platforms, and also between the officials and their colleagues in Russia are established via different initiatives and platforms on the regional level. It's also very important when we see how Belarusian officials cooperate with their regional Russian counterparts. And also at the local level, at the local level of Belarusian public administration, we see how the representatives of the pro-Russian organizations they are becoming members of consultative bodies. For instance, in Mogilov, we see how the Russian House is a member of the Regional Coordination Council of the political parties and civil society organizations. Also, I should mention that officials at different levels, they themselves often refer to Russia as the main and often the only source of so-called good practices. So basically, when they need to implement some innovation in the system of public administration, they mostly use Russian experience, while they just do not know other experience usually. I would also mention importance of large Belarusian governmental, non-governmental organizations, and we know that such organizations exist in Belarus. For instance, Belarusian Republican Youth Union or Republican Association Belarus or Belarusian Women Union. So I think that they might be considered also pro-Russian, while they have counterparts from Russia as their official partners, and they jointly implement different projects, activities, and we can also we reflected in our newsletter. They have some regular meetings, some common events, and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, summing up, in spite of all these facts, we may claim that the formal and informal institutional interconnections between Russian and Russian public officials are quickly become less relevant when there is a threat to the authoritarian system of Lukashenko. So I would say that the whole system of public administration is aimed, first of all, at preserving like Lukashenko's position, rather than pursuing any geopolitical preferences or any geopolitical goals. And now I will briefly reflect on Belarusian Orthodox Church. From all previous research, we know that Belarusian Orthodox Church is considered to be one of the most pro-Russian organizations in Belarus, and even from the formal point of view, it's true, because we know that the Belarusian Orthodox Church is a canonical subdivision of Russian Orthodox Church in Belarus, and it has a special status, but it is headed by exarch, who is appointed directly from the Moscow, and also the highest officials, if I may call them, in Belarusian Orthodox Church, they are also appointed from Moscow. Also this influence of Russia on Belarusian Orthodox Church, we can also see in different projects which are implemented together with, with Russian Orthodox Church on the territory of Belarus. And I should also mention that in the project which are implemented by the Orthodox Church on the territory of Belarus, actively participate Belarusian public officials, and it's also a kind of this interconnections between Russia and Belarusian public officials. We know that Belarusian Orthodox Church has a special and privileged status in Belarus, and some special mechanisms of support from from Lukashenko himself, and also from the Belarusian government. And from the point of view of this, a kind of everyday cooperation, we see numerous visits of highest hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church to Minsk, and also some meetings of Lukashenko with representatives of Russian Orthodox Church. However, what is interestingly that during and especially after events in Belarus in August 2020, Belarusian Orthodox Church, in spite of all the Russian influence, it was not totally supportive towards Lukashenko, and it's a long story. I will skip it here, but I should mention that as a result of this a bit ambivalent position of Belarusian Orthodox Church, the head of the church was changed. So on August 25, the Synod of Russian Orthodox Church, they replaced the head of the Belarusian Exarchate, and it was quite interesting development, because previously it was Metropolitan Pavel, who was Russian himself, but he appeared to be a bit more supportive to Belarusian protests than the person who changed him lately, and who is Belarusian by nationality. Just summing up on this situation with Russian influence on Belarusian Orthodox Church, I should mention that it's not just an influence, it's real Russian organization inside Belarus. However, when we analyze the policy and different developments which are interconnected with Belarusian Orthodox Church, it's not a very simple picture, I should say, and there could be rather diverse development. And the last thing I will mention is about public health and interconnections between the system of healthcare in Belarus and with Russia. From the formal point of view, there are a lot of cooperation, there are a lot of formal agreements between the ministries of healthcare. And also, it's very interesting also recent developments which are connected with COVID-19 situation. We know that Belarus accepted Sputnik as the main vaccine, and also there are plans to produce Sputnik inside Belarus. So it's questionable whether we should mention it or evaluate this as a Russian influence, but probably we should do it, and we should pay attention to this influence via healthcare system. I will stop here, and I will be ready and happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, and thanks so much for this 3D picture. We see that when we talk about Russian influences, we're not talking about only hard power, political influence, or military and security influence. We're also talking about media, we're talking about culture and language, we're talking about church. And in many aspects, it also reflects other, let's say, post-Soviet, I don't like this word post-Soviet, but let's say Eastern European countries, which have been part of the Soviet Union, in Ukraine including, and we have lots of parallels. Now, let me pass to the questions, and I will ask the audience to put your questions in this broadcast. We have already a couple of questions. I will read them and we will try to answer them. So the first question is from Daniel. I think it concerns the political question. Is Lukashenko pro-Russian after all, or he rather sees cooperation with Putin as a means to stay in power? I think I will pass the floor to all of you. Maybe all of you have certain remarks on this. Katerina?
Yeah, I guess I can start with this. Well, with this vivid comparison, I've read once in Brian Whitmer's analysis, Brian Whitmer from Atlantic Council, when he said that Lukashenko is performing this little two-step dance between the West and Moscow, and whenever things go bad with Russia, Lukashenko turns to the West and then sort of tries to annoy Russia with this rapprochement, and then gets what he wants from Russia after this little sort of performance. And I would say that this is the tactics of balancing that has been working for Lukashenko for years. And it is also worthy to notice that Lukashenko's words are changing and his rhetoric is changing very rapidly. And by this, I mean that at the beginning of the presidential campaign 2020, Lukashenko portrayed some Russian forces, including this incident around Wagner mercenaries, that there was a Russian attempt to interfere into Belarusian political affairs and to agonize relations with the Kremlin over that incident. And then when the protests factor jumped in, then the situation changed, and suddenly official Minsk was using again this brotherhood rhetoric. It is us against the evil West.
But this leads to another question, whether this situation right now, after the crackdown of protests, after the very, harsh reaction from the West, does it mean that, you already mentioned it, that Lukashenko doesn't have the room for maneuvering? But do you think this lack of room for maneuvering, lack of the Western kind of a card, is irreversible? Or it can change, judging from the Belarusian recent history? For example, well, the crackdown of protests was before, of course, not in this huge scale, but still we have seen the return of the game. Do you think this return of the game, this two-step policy, return of this two-step policy is possible? Maybe Vasil, I will pass the floor to Vasil right now.
Yeah, thank you. I think that we can speak about the significant change vis-a-vis the previous similar, if we can put it in that way, situation that happened, for example, in the beginning of 2000s, when there was also a harsh crackdown on the civil society, and the authorities, they burnt out almost any kind of room for acting, and the civil society was forced to act in a kind of a step-by-step approach, and also somehow formulate the red lines that they cannot cross in order to be able to continue their activity. At that point, for example, in the beginning of 2010s, there was some kind of balance that civil society managed to reach with the interaction with the authorities. But right now, they are not looking for the same things, as I can understand, because there is a clearly lack of legitimacy of Lukashenko on the grassroots level. And as I think Shreman has formulated it, or it was at Piotr Kuznetsov, I don't remember, that there is civil society is just waiting for a window of opportunity to start and unleash its potential to the streets again. So they're waiting, and people are waiting, and they are not prepared to kind of tolerate the same level of violence and brutality forever. So I would say that at least on the grassroots level, the situation changed completely, and it differs a lot from what we have witnessed previously. But speaking about the relations in the international sphere, I think that Lukashenko still has some room for maneuvering between the West and Russia, because as I can see that there was not so really consolidated or I don't know, maybe decisive position from the side of Western countries, because they could have done significantly more to repress the regime. But certainly there are a lot of things that are happening, that are being done. But I think that a lot could be done more. So yeah. Thanks.
So do you think, maybe just a rhetorical question to reflect later, do you think that mild reaction from the West is a part of the tactics, or it is just typical deep concerned reaction? Let's think about maybe later, but I will ask the question to Tatiana. We have a question from Natalie, and I think it goes to Tatiana. Does the Lukashenko regime rely solely on him, or could it exist even without Batska? It leads to your analysis of public administration too. So do you think that the system can produce some kind of another Lukashenko 2.0, replace Lukashenko, but remain in power, maybe supported by Russians, maybe not?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. I think that the whole system of public administration in Belarus is built around Lukashenko himself. And basically what we observe within the public administration system is that Lukashenko is changing it all the time. So he's changing positions, he's changing people on these positions. And the main purpose is to grew up somehow like new leadership or new leaders inside the system. So as far as we see like any stronger official within Belarusian government, then we see how Lukashenko takes him or her from one place and put it into another place. So, and it's vividly done in purpose not to allow to create additional networks, additional connections, and so on and so forth. Of course, unexpectedly, some new leaders might appear even within this system. However, from the recent developments, we see that the system is quite strong from the point of view that it's one of the main ground of Lukashenko's support within Belarus, while it's built so hierarchically and is built on the principle of personal loyalty to Lukashenko, that there were quite few cases when high-ranked officials they left the system in order to support pro-democratic movements and Belarusian people. And just briefly, I will reflect on this, question previous, which were asked to my colleagues. about pro-Russianness of of former President Lukashenko. I don't know how it's better to call him, but we should like evaluate him from the point of view of the populist politician first of all. So he's first of all populist, who is just like following the path of preserving his own power and his own position. So for him, it's not important either to be with Russia or to be with the West. However, I should mention that from the point of view of this, like culture, outlook, values, we definitely see that he is pro-Russian. I mean, any of his public statements, it's about values which are, like from this Russian world from the, broader point of view. I mean, he's like reflecting to values, to traditional family, to so on and so forth. I mean, to this very like general ideas which are developed within this Russian world discourse. So from this point of view, I mean, I would say that he's like a politician when it comes to geopolitics. I mean, populist politician. But from the point of view of this value and culture, he is definitely pro-Russian, and he sees Russia as the reference for all his developments and all his politics.
Thank you, Tatiana. And it leads me to another question which I wanted to ask about the Russian world. So we understand in Eastern Europe, in Eastern Partnership states, how important it is. I think people in the West underestimate the Russian soft power. And basically, maybe this soft power is even more dangerous than the hard power. So in Ukraine, we obviously have many similar problems. My question would be, what is the alternative to the Russian world in the Belarusian society? What are the narratives, the identity, ideas, the new identities which are developed? Tatiana mentioned church. In Ukraine, as you might know, this was very important development of a kind of creating of basically an autocephalous Ukrainian Orthodox Church, contrary to Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is basically Russian Orthodox Church. In Belarus, we see influences of Catholic Church, of Protestantism historically. Does this play a role? Are there any discussions about Belarusian identity which is separate from the Russian identity? Because in Ukraine it's quite strong even among Russian speakers that look, we are not the same people. Is this developing in Belarus as well? Who can reply? Maybe Katerina, will you reply to this?
Yeah, I will start with bringing up an important factor that under Lukashenko rule over past 26 years, there was very little space for development of Belarusian national identity, and it did exist and it does exist, but it exists underground because it comes into political sort of conflict with the official pro-Russian Lukashenko created ideology. And whenever you speak Belarusian language or create some cultural event to promote Belarusian national identity, then you could be considered as an extremist, as it happened recently to this book on Belarusian national idea, where multiple authors, myself and Tatiana included, were interviewed talking about what is the idea for, let's say, for Belarus for the future and cultural identity. And those attempts, even minor attempts to maintain Belarusian authentic culture and language, are considered as a threat to Lukashenko and as the opponents to his regime. And in that sense, I understand the concerns, how it looks for the foreigners, like why the Belarusians do not speak their language, or why do not claim that they have an opposite view on, let's say, political orientations, and that they're not all of them are pro-Russian. But when this ideology is imposed on the state level, and then the propaganda, the Belarusian state propaganda is clearly pro-Russian, and then they would transmit, I mean, the Belarusian TV would transmit more and more of the Russian propaganda channels in Belarus, and make Belarusians more prone to this influence also from Russia. So I'm saying that in this environment, it is hard to preserve your national identity, and you have to struggle a little bit more to claim it. And what is also important, that if we look at the protests, the Belarusians did not, like, no one urged them to do so, but they brought this national symbols of red and white flags on the streets, and many slogans were in Belarusian, and many would sing Belarusian songs. And this means that they also sort of re-emphasizes this statement that the Belarusian culture exists, but it exists underground. And also, I would refer here to the studies by Professor Vatnamatsky of the public opinion polls, and also including on national, or sort of the views on political orientations among this maybe not only the Belarusians who live in the urban area, but in the rural areas and those closer to Russia, that he concluded, and the studies of the focus group concluded, that the views of those parts of the population, they are subject to change, and they are changing depending on the change of the public narratives and the mass media. And so it means that today, if we watch Russian, if many Belarusians watch Russian TV, and then say they would go to schools only using Russian language, because that's virtually the only language we can use in the public sphere at the moment, then most people would likely relate themselves as or have friendly views towards Russia and relate themselves to the Russian culture. But as those narratives change, channeled through, let's say, mass media and on the state level, then the public opinion shifts also, like, follows this this developments.
Thank you, Katerina. I think it's very important, and what is like strikes me is that I think it seems to me that in the Western countries, it is somehow believed that everything related to identity is anti-liberal or leads you to far-right authoritarianism or whatever. But in Eastern Europe, in our countries, we see that identity struggle in Ukraine and Belarus can be perfectly pro-liberal and anti-authoritarian, because it is fighting against the Russian world, and it's very important and interesting. We have another question from the audience. Do you consider Russian opposition to be a significant ally for Belarusian civil society opposing Lukashenko? Let me address this question to Vasil.
Thank you. Well, this is a really tricky question, because I really not sure that we can speak about some kind of interaction between the Russian and Belarusian opposition, because certainly, I mean, from one point of view, Navalny is considered quite positively, I would say, in Belarus, but from another, he has been holding previously probably quite I would say nationalist position, maybe. So in which he clearly puts forward Russian interests, national interests above anything else. So I think that in this respect, the Belarusians could not hope for any kind of support from Russian opposition, probably maybe only on rhetorical level, because as we can see, for example, from Russian protests, from recent Russian protests, a lot of them have been taking the techniques used by Belarusian opposition, and this was also really interesting to behold. But yeah, I think that we can only speak about some kind of informal connections, informal transferring of techniques of protest, but not kind of informal connections between the Belarusian and Russian opposition. This is my.
Thank you, Vasil. Tatiana, maybe you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just briefly, I think that, like, in this situation, I mean, the current situation, Belarus is a kind of front runner in comparison with Russia, because you know, like, really what we see, on the one hand, we in Belarus we still have a more profound authoritarian regime, even in comparison with Russia. But on the other hand, we also see that these pro-democratic techniques, I mean, this pro-democratic mobilization in Belarus, is also deeper now. So when it's for me, and I think for many of us, it's still questionable whether Putin is getting the support of majority, and in my opinion, most probably he still does. Then Lukashenko is then getting the majority of public support. So, and the whole situation, like in Russia and in Belarus, I mean, from the point of view of this division between, majority and minority is a kind of a different one. So I think that Belarusian opposition and Russian opposition, they're a kind of a natural, I don't know, maybe for Belarusian opposition, it's not so important today to cooperate. Of course, it's important, but it's not from the pragmatic point of view. Maybe it's not so important to cooperate with Russian opposition, and maybe it's also a question to Russian opposition itself, to pay more attention to Belarus as a separate country, as a separate leadership. Not just to refer to Belarus as a kind of like neighboring country, but which may also be a kind of a part of Russia or something like this, which we have heard from Navalny actually. So yeah, that's just brief reflection.
From the Ukrainian point of view, I would say that there is Russian opposition which has to learn a lot from the Belarusian opposition and not vice versa. So it's also important to reverse these, stereotypes and looking for kind of, a big brother in Russia. Sometimes Russian society is lagging behind Ukrainian or Belarusian societies, and it is important to note. I think we have run out of time. We have no questions in the chat, no more questions, I guess. And let me thank you so much for Katerina, Vasily, and Tatiana for brilliant presentations. So let me address to the audience with the call to follow this Belarus Watch newsletters. You can see that the situation is developing very quickly, and as you have seen from the presentation of the colleagues, what is going on in Belarus will influence developments in many other countries, including Russia, Baltic states, Ukraine. So it is really very important, and it's very, very important that we keep our attention to it. I would pass the floor to David Stulik, who is Director of Eastern Europe Program at European Values think tank for Center for Security Studies, one of the core organizers of this project, Belarus Watch. For final remarks, David, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all three of you and to you, Volodymyr, for having you today and presenting this study. I think we, as a Czech think tank, we are honored to have people like you on board in our joint cooperation projects. And let me reassure you that as long as we are here, we will definitely do our best that both your countries, but especially Belarus, will soon be also on the same kind of a pro-democratic path. And I hope that soon there will be no need for similar projects, so that projects will be just part of a history when kids would be laughing at what they are reading in these reports. So let me assure you of our solidarity. Yesterday we had another event with you, Volodymyr, remember? And it turned out that we have so many things in common. And let's build on these similarities and these common things, and let's keep working together for the same sort of objective, to have our countries as democratic and prosperous democracies. So I have nothing else to wish to all of us. So yeah, and again, thank you all, and thank the audience for your questions and for your attention.
Thank you very much, David. And let me remind that we had Belarusian experts, Katerina Shmatsina, Rethink CEE Fellow at German Marshall Fund, a Research Fellow at Belarusian Institute for Strategic Studies. We also had Vasil Navumov, who is a Fellow at Ośrodek Studiów Wschodnich, the Center for Eastern Studies, and Tatiana Chulicka, researcher at Vytautas Magnus University. So again, follow the Belarusian developments, and thank you for your attention.
you. Bye.